So I wanted to introduce teststar. Teststar is a web application that can run both unit and web tests. And the idea behind it really was to have a companion to a continuous integration server so that after the build you could copy in your binaries, test unit tests, and then copy your binaries to your web server and then test your web tests. The way it does that I'll go into later and break down the project. Right now I just want to show you how you can get your hands on it. So you go to github.com/markstyles/teststar. This is the project you can check out. I've already downloaded it and installed it set up on my machine. So I'll just jump right in and show you how it works. So there's really 3 pages to this whole thing. There's the unit test pages, which just shows you what unit tests you've compiled into your library and allows you to run them. There's a web testing page, similar. It shows you information, and then there's a web testing data manager. I'll go over that in a minute. Really, I just want to show you this here. So the unit tests, I have a sample test already set up, and all it does is really assert true that something is true. So if you hit run, it just comes back with a result. Green is succeed. Orange is like an exception. It threw an exception of some kind. And red will come. Your entries that are red will be a failure. So anytime there can be multiple categories, and so let's say you have like 6 categories and you choose 3, and you decide that you want to make a test, a script out of that. You can just write the script name here. It'll generate the script for you, and that's just kind of a nice way so that you can obviously run this web test through the web application and see that it's running, but you can also run it through a console application from the batch script, which is part of the project as well. So we'll jump into the web testing too. I just want to give you one through the front end. Now the front end, the web testing also has its own set of tests, but to run web testing you need web configuration, so a website configuration data. So the first thing you'll have to do when you get here, if you're running a new system, is to actually create that information. Now what you need is environment information, which is basically providing a prefix for any given site. And this is because each site individually can exist on several different servers, and each server tends to have its own prefix. So in this case, I'm just going to be creating one for the web environment and giving it a prefix of www. The IP address field is here for a test that I ran locally to be able to check my DNS, but you don't need to provide it, it's optional. A system is basically a collection of sites, so if you want to group your sites for in any way, and I group them by Sitecore sites and I group them by static sites, which are flat file, non-database .NET sites. So in this case, I'm just going to call it static. And then I'm going to add my sites. My site. So I want to test something that I know exists and something that I know doesn't exist. So it's google.com, static. You can add properties, which are just key value stores. I use this for Sitecore sites to be able to store the site ID and the language code. But you don't have to. It's just useful if you need to store information for a particular site to test against. So here, not every site can support every environment, so you're able to configure which environments run for each site. So I'm going to add that. And you really want to go left to right, adding the environment, systems, and insights, because you need the environments and systems to build a site or to store in a site. It still works the other way, it just makes more sense to do it that. So I'm going to add one more site. I'm going to call it nothing. and it's going to be a non-functional domain. I'm going to add the web environment, and then I'm going to go back into the web testing. Now, you can see the settings are set up. So I'm going to run a ping test against the web environment against my static sites. You can also just individually select them, but when you have dozens in this list, it just makes more sense to group them. So I run that test, Google succeeded, the other one didn't, and it'll tell you that much. So now, let's say you've run these tests and you want to set up a script to do that. This will generate that batch script for you. It's just a nice feature to have. You can do a manual. I found it easier just to kind of get myself started. So now that you've kind of seen the UI, I want to jump into the project itself and show you, just break down the parts of it. So the core itself has entities for the test environment, test site, test system, and these are stored in JavaScript. So really what it is that you're opening these files, deserializing the data, and converting them into these objects. And that's what the entities are there for, so you can manipulate the objects, but leaves them stored in JavaScript. There's extensions for all the test methods, suite, and all that, so that we can get categories and get methods. The managers are different for each of the types of tests. The unit tests are much simpler, so they just return simpler objects on the error, failure, and success states. Web test has more information based on the environment, site, and the response code. And these are, the things that are implementing these web test handlers are the web application pages and the console application. They're the ones that have to deal with running the tests, but you can implement your own in some other way if you need to. These web test managers they're managing running the actual tests. So there's the web test manager and the unit test manager, and when you're clicking that button, it's compiling all that information, passing in the test handler, and then running all the tests for you. The providers are here to convert your JavaScript to your entities. The base web test is an object that provides you context for your web test. And that's what you'll be basing your classes off of when you build web tests. The utility classes are just some context constants that we're pulling from the web config so that you can configure your system to use the different files for your JavaScript entities. You can tell it which assemblies it should be checking to populate the lists of tests for. It's just nice to be able to configure that information so that you can. I put that in there so you can. So the next two steps are the unit tests and the web tests. Now the test system is actually built on NUnit, and the web test does support WATIN, which is WATIN. It's a web application testing built on top of NUnit. So if you've worked with NUnit, you'll be familiar with this setup. So the text picture here, I'm setting the category, and then here I'm just asserting true is true. That's all my test is, but you can build something more complicated here. And there's a space for it. Same with the web tests. Here I've provided two tests that are, one is simple and one is more complicated, and I wanted to be able to give an example of each to show you kind of what is possible. So the simple ping test is really just running this web request, and if it throws an exception, it's because there's a 400 or 500 error, and it's setting the response status, which gets sent back to the handlers, which is the page in the case of on the teststar site. The sitemap test itself is basically getting the sitemap XML and then looping through every link and testing, make sure that each link is there. Now this is useful because if all your links are broken, then you need to update your sitemap. It's just something that I needed. But it also gives an example of something else which I wanted to bring to light, which is here on if the URL, if there aren't any URLs in the XML, it throws an assertion fill. But if it's going through each node and it's checking the response and it fails, it doesn't throw a failure right away. It's setting the failure to a string builder. Basically, the message is being stored, and then when it checks at the very end, if it had failed any of them at any point, it will assert that failure log so that it doesn't stop in the middle of checking all the links. Now, this web test is arguably more than just a single web test. Whereas a ping test is just testing one single URL. This is actually testing a number of them in a single test. So you have kind of that need to not fail it right away. You want to be able to continue running tests. I also use this on tests when I'm testing, web services and things, so that I don't have to, keep rerunning the test to make sure that something else got caught or checked. So that's the two test types and where they're intended to be built and stored. The test launcher here. Now, you've seen the web application, and that's showing you how to run the site, run the test through the site. But when you create those batch files, those batch files are calling the launcher. The launcher takes in a couple of parameters. One, telling it whether or not it's a web test or not. It's this -w is saying it's a web test. This -u is saying it's a unit test. And then based on that, it's running different. It's passing the args into a different method. And this is useful. This is really where you're getting that the ability to run your unit and web tests from batch script files. And you can then call those batch script files from your build steps in your continuous integration server. I also run my web tests daily from scheduled tasks, and so that's another use for it. Then here you've got your web application. Again, it's really only these 3 pages, and then there's the data gets stored here in these files, and you can see the JSON objects here. Then there's the scripts, which are here, and this is showing you the script recreated. It's telling you it's a web test. This is the assembly, this is the test, this is the environment. There's no system, it's just telling you the list of sites to test against. And you can switch that. You can say, no, I don't want these individual sites, I just want the single system, and it will still get all those sites for you. Then that's really it. It's a very simple concept, and it allows you to kind of get a lot of work done out of it. And the intention really was to kind of help out a lot of guys I know that work at agencies that do a lot of work on many different websites, and they don't necessarily have the time to build a lot of unit tests. So maybe web testing is a lot lower barrier for entry to get them, just making sure that the sites are up regularly every day. They're just pinging them. They're also doing like search tests, checking the index, rebuilding the index, who knows, whatever. But really there's something just kind of give you that central location to build something with. So you have a project here that does all those things and kind of gets you started a lot more quickly. So that's teststar. Please go down and check it out at GitHub and see what you can get out of it.